All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Aquarium of the Pacific's Online Academy. My name is Dana, and I'm a member of the education team here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, coming to you live from Long Beach, California today. Now, today's program is going to be really special because it's one of my favorite subjects to talk about here at the Aquarium because it kind of breaks the fourth wall, if you will. We get to talk a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes and about what our husbandry staff does. Now, husbandry is a fancy word for our animal health care team, so that is the subject of the program today. We're going to be chatting all about animal health care, and we're going to break it down into a handful of chunks. First, we're going to talk about the team that is involved in our animal health care. Then we're going to talk about our preventative care. Then we're going to talk about maybe some emergency care because we are dealing with wildlife and that does happen. And so we're kind of prepared for anything at any time. So with that being said, throughout this program, if there's something that you want to know a little bit more about, something you're wondering and you'd like to dive a little bit deeper, we do have a way for you to join in. We have a phone number right down here. That number is 562-286-1838. You're welcome to text us live during the program, and that is at 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday, July. Oh my gosh, it's July. July 21st. Okay, so if you're watching between 2 and 2:30 today, please feel free to text us. If you're watching after the live program, go ahead and shoot us an email instead. It's going to be right here on the bottom. It's live@lbaop.org. During our live programming, we are watching the stream, but if it's outside of regular programming hours, there might not be anyone sitting at the computer watching that text screen, and that's when the email response is a little bit easier for us because we want to make sure that we are reaching out to you and answering all of your questions. With that being said, if you are watching live and if you are texting in, make sure that you have adult permission to text in and join us today because standard texting rates do apply. That means you want to make sure that you're allowed to text us anything and that we can respond. So with that being said, let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about our animal health care. So to start, like I said, we're going to talk about our husbandry department. Now, husbandry, like I said, means healthcare, animal healthcare staff. And here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we have over 12,000 animals. And you can imagine that it takes a large team to care for them. And so our team is broken up into a couple different roles, a couple different titles. One of them is going to be an aquarist. Now, what do you think an aquarist works on? Yeah, so Sarah, who's going to be controlling what's going on behind me today, she brought up our tropical reef webcam. And that's because our aquarists work with our fish and our invertebrates, our corals, our fish swimming around, our larger fish, such as our sharks and our rays. And so they're going to be the people who are responsible for that group of animals. And they're going to be the ones dealing with the exhibits, dealing with what it looks like, dealing with the care of the animal. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. Another group in our husbandry department is going to be our mammalogists. Now, that's going to be these two right here. This is an example of something that a mammalogist might do. Mammalogists are people who are working with our mammals, like the name suggests. So this, I believe, is Shelby, one of our harbor seals. And these are two of our husbandry department's mammalogists. And so it looks like Jimmy here is measuring Shelby from nose to tail. Shelby's actually also sitting on a scale right here. So it's a little bit bigger than the scales, right, that we might have in our bathroom or our bedroom, or even when you go to the doctor's office. But it's doing the same job, right? It's taking that animal's weight. And then another group of our husbandry department is our aviculturists. Now, aviculturists are dealing with our birds. These are a beautiful example of two of our rainbow lorikeets. These more specifically are Swainson's lorikeets. And aviculturists deal with all of our birds. So that's going to be, at first, you might think, well, how many birds does the aquarium have? But when you really start to think about our exhibits, we have quite a few. We have over 100 birds in lorikeet forest. And we also have a behind-the-scenes place called The Barn that houses some other birds. You might have heard of Lola. He's been all over our social media feed throughout our closure and while we were trying to give some of our animals some more enrichment and take advantage of the empty halls. Lola got to go on some journeys and explore other animals. We also have a Shorebirds exhibit that houses, let's see, blackneck stilts, avocets. It has some white ibis, so a lot of really beautiful shorebird animals, something that we might find more in like a wetland habitat. And then we also have our diving birds. So this is an example of one of our horned puffins, tufted puffins, excuse me. And so we have birds that live typically in the northern Pacific habitat. It's a lot colder, and they are designed to dive into our water. So you can see that they have these really big, strong swimming feet, and then they have very sleek bodies that's very hydrodynamic, meaning they're able to move through the water very well. So this is just an example of some of our animals here that our animal healthcare workers or our husbandry staff take care of. But of course, there's other husbandry department staff members that maybe aren't working as closely with the animals. Our dive team is actually part of our husbandry department. They're going to be mostly focused on dive safety, but that also includes all of the aspects of getting into an exhibit and diving in an exhibit and caring for animals from underwater. And then last but not least, our vet team. So we have over 12,000 animals. We do have a special animal hospital and animal care facility on site. It is called the Molina Animal Care Center. And the Molina Animal Care Center is where a lot of our care for our animals happens. I like to think of it like a doctor's office, and we're going to explore that a little bit later on. First, we're going to talk about where the care for our animals starts. But before we go there, we do have a question. The question was, how old is Shelby? Shelby's 30 years old, and it's special because later on at the end of the program, we're actually going to talk a little bit more about a very, very unique and impressive surgery that Shelby just went under. And so that was back in January. We'll chat a little bit more about that. But we are going to talk about where the care starts, and that starts with taking care of that animal's exhibit. So in order to take care of an animal, we have to make sure that the home we are putting them in, such as Amber Forest or Blue Cavern or our tropical reef or our seals and sea lion exhibit, or even lorikeet forest, right? All of these have to be catered towards the needs of the animal. And those basic needs are going to be finding food, finding shelter, finding the right medium to get their air, right? That sounds funny, but would lorikeet forest be underwater? No, definitely not, because birds have lungs. Would we have our sharks walking around on gravel? Probably not, but they do like to move around on our water, right? So catering to the needs of the animals. We're actually going to go behind the scenes of some of our exhibits and check out maybe what it looks like to make sure that the water and the habitat they're living in is nice and safe. So this back here is a behind the scenes exhibit. Raise your hand if you've ever been to the aquarium before. Oh, good. There's 3 hands in this room. Hopefully there's some hands at home. If not, we're going to be looking behind the scenes and exploring a lot of our aquarium areas today, so that's okay. This right here, this exhibit, this is behind the clownfish exhibit. So if you've ever seen the bright orange clownfish and the dark black clownfish, and I think we even have some blue pallet tangs in there, and then there's anemones all over. We're right behind that exhibit. So on the outside, it's blue and beautiful and bright and colorful. But on the inside, right, behind the scenes, we have a lot of pipes. We have a lot of tubes. And this is all because we have a lot of filtration going on. So this is a bio tower. This is full of little plastic, what we call bio balls. They're little chunks of plastic that have a lot of surface area that allow healthy bacteria to grow. The bacteria is going to be breaking down waste products and removing it from the water. This is called a sand filter. Sand filters move sand through, and as the water passes through, larger particles can get caught up in the sand, and the water continues to pass through. In fact, a lot of this mimics similar processes that happen out in our open ocean. These are our pumps. These are actually what's moving water through. We have what's called a UV filter up here. The UV light hits the water and it can kill parasites and disease. So there's all sorts of things that start before an animal were to even need health care, right? It's all what we call preventative. So filtration, right? That's a big one. Another area where we're very cautious of how we take care of our animals is dealing with their food, right? And at first you might be like, well, I give my dog food, or I give my cat food. I don't think a whole lot about it. But the more you learn about the nutritional needs of animals, the more you realize that they all need a variety. And so here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we actually feed our animals restaurant quality, sustainable seafood. Now, those are a lot of big words, but what that means to me is that Parker, our large sea lion, is eating better than I do, right? So Parker's food is all catered to him. He gets the nutrition that he needs. He gets the amount that he needs. Our mammalogists, we got to see some of them working with Shelby earlier. They are making sure that throughout the year, Parker is getting the amount of food that he needs depending on the season. So this is Parker. This is our big boy right here. I believe this is probably Harpo. They're usually side by side. And you can see that Parker is significantly bigger than Harpo. Do you think they're going to be getting fed the same amount? They're not. So again, each of our animals is catered to depending on their diet needs. So that's where the nutritional aspect comes in. We also give them restaurant quality. Now, the reason we do that is we want to make sure that we're not giving our animals any seafood that might have something wrong with the seafood, right? If we don't want to give them a fish that might have issues, because then they could potentially pass anything on to them. And so it's the same as how we at home might take extra special care when we're cooking with chicken, right? You don't want to touch raw chicken and then lick your hands. So it's the same idea of making sure that we're handling the food correctly and we're giving them the best of the best. You also probably don't want to eat or drink milk that's sat on the counter for a week, right? So we wouldn't want to give our animals anything that had gone bad. And so restaurant quality care, right, or sustainable seafood, that means that they're getting the best of the best. Just like we need to make sure that we're getting our fruits and veggies and our carbs and our proteins and making sure that we're eating really well. If you start to change your diet and eat really well, you'll automatically notice a difference, right? So we make sure that our animals get that. Another aspect is cleaning the exhibits. So if you want to go ahead and put Trop Reef on real quick. We're going to bring up our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. How exactly do we clean an exhibit that large, right? We actually have divers who go into our exhibits and clean for us. Like I said, our dive team is considered our husbandry staff, right? Even though they are focused more on the dive safety aspect, their team of volunteers is the one that is getting in and doing a lot of the scrubbing. So for an exhibit this large, we actually break it into chunks, and each dive team will come in and manage a certain area. If you've been here over on this side, there's a large blue wall that represents the open ocean. That's my personal favorite place to clean, because when you're cleaning the rocks, sometimes it's hard to actually tell if you're making a difference. You definitely are, but sometimes it's hard because the rocks are brown and the algae's brown. But when you get to scrub this blue wall over here, it's very, very clear that you're making a difference. In fact, if you've ever gone on to explore some of our webcams, and you've seen that the water looks really hazy, it's maybe not as clear as you're used to, that usually means someone was just in there cleaning, right? So as we scrub, we kind of disrupt some of the algae that was there, and it gets put into the water, and then it gets filtered out through all of that filtration stuff. So again, a lot of that is preventative. We're trying to keep our animals from needing anything more intense, right? And so the last part of our preventative care is something called an annual checkup. All right. And that is where the Molina Animal Care Center comes into play. So we're going to spend the next 15 minutes actually exploring the Molina Animal Care Center and learning a little bit more about what it looks like to be an animal who might find their way to our animal hospital. So we're going to go check out some of our exam rooms, get a little tour of just the overall building. But I want you to just make some observations. Okay. Raise your hand if you got an annual checkup this year. Oops. Sarah's questionable about it. I for sure have not, right? It's a little early in the year. We got plenty of time. But it's really good for humans to go and talk to a doctor, talk to a healthcare professional, and make sure everything's going well, right? And we do the same thing for our animals. So while we might not have someone on our back making sure that we make our way into our doctor's office, the animals are fortunate to have that husbandry department make sure and stay on top of the dates. So let's go ahead and pull up the exam room here. Awesome. I'm going to step off and allow you to make some observations here. What do you notice? What do you see here? So this is actually some of our vet staff working right there. This is an exam table right here. Do we rotate more at all, or is that the end? Gotcha. Let's go back to the beginning here real quick. Over here, we've got some more workstations. It just spans around the room. Okay. And so this is actually my favorite part right over in this corner here. These are all windows, right? So you might be looking at this and saying, well, it kind of looks like an office area / an exam room / a doctor's office, right? So it's a couple different things working in one room. But the point is that this is like a doctor's office. You find an exam room, right? Just like you might sit up on the table there. This is where they keep and pay attention to the animal's charts, just like you might have a doctor or a nurse pull out a chart for you with your health history. And so the biggest difference that you're going to see here is actually in this corner. Like I mentioned, this entire wall is windows. And that's kind of weird. Hopefully your doctor's office isn't windows, right? But what I love about that is the fact that here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we're very transparent when it comes to our healthcare. We're able to work on animals. We're able to do those annual exams that we were talking about, and guests just like you can sit on the other side of this window and watch and ask questions. If there's any major procedures going on, we try to have an educator out there to answer those questions. And that's one of my favorite radio calls because it means I'm about to learn a lot, right? And so as an educator here, I know a lot about a lot, but when it comes down to a surgical procedure on an animal, I'm going to have a lot of questions. The audience and you are going to have a lot of questions, and we actually get to learn together. So it's always an adventure for us to learn a little bit more about what's going on inside of our animals. But again, this is where they would get their annual checkup. In fact, just the other day, I saw them bring some of our reptiles into the Molina Animal Care Center, and usually they'll take their weight, they'll measure them, they might take some x-rays. So just like a doctor's office or a hospital that you and I might go to, we have all of those supplies available for our animals. We have an x-ray machine, we have an ultrasound machine, we have a surgical suite next door to the room we were just looking at. We have all the medication, we have all the scalpels and technical supplies we might need. It's really amazing how stocked we are, and it's also great to have all of that right here on site. Okay. So because we have the Molina Animal Care Center on site, it means that when something goes wrong, or if we have to bring an animal down for an annual exam, they don't have to be transported very far, right? This question might be more for the parents at home, but how are your kids when it comes to taking them to the doctors? Yeah, sometimes kids don't like that, right? And some of the trauma is just the fact that you have to get in the car and go. And so to be able to just take our animals very close to their exhibit, in fact, some of those machines and supplies that I talked about, like the ultrasound, the x-ray, the scales, those are even portable. We can go to the exhibit, right? It's like a doctor making a house call. So it's really, really special that we have all of these resources on site for our animals. It takes away the stress of transport. It means that if something were to go wrong and we had to go into an emergency procedure, we're right here. We can get it started as soon as possible. So there are a lot of amazing benefits for that. So again, these are all preventative, right? But what happens when something goes wrong? Because it does happen. And so we do also have emergency care, right? Before we get into our emergency care, I'm going to answer a couple questions that are coming in, and then we'll wrap up doing a little bit more exploration of the Molina Animal Care Center and talking about some case studies that have actually happened. So we had a question about how long Shelby has been in the aquarium. That's a really good question. So she arrived here when she was 3 years old. So that math doesn't work out. She's 24. That makes sense. That's why. So she arrived when she was 3 years old. The aquarium has been open for, I think we're on 22 years now. Yeah, a long, long time, right? We're really lucky to have Shelby here. Penny wants to know, how do the animals get their shots? Good question. So again, maybe a question more for the parents, but it could be for the kids. How do you handle getting shots? right? Sometimes that can be a little hard for a person. I know my sister, when we were really young, she did not like getting shots. I didn't seem to have a problem with it. I still don't seem to have a problem with it, so I've been really lucky. Trish, my sister, I don't think has gotten a whole lot better at it. But our animals, as a human getting a shot, you have a doctor, you have an adult with you who can explain what's happening. The animals, we can't always explain, or we can try, but they might not understand what we're saying, right? And so that's actually a great question that can kind of lead into the fact that so much of our work is preventative, that we actually ask our animals to become active participants in their healthcare. And when I say that, what I mean is we work with them on a daily basis so that if they have to get a shot, or if they have to have their weight taken, or if they have to get eye drops, or if they have to, right? We deal with the ifs in advance. Our animals are used to that procedure. We actually had one of the first southern sea otters in the world to voluntarily give a blood draw. They were able to provide us with, I'm assuming it was their paw or flipper, I don't know, and do a blood draw. And that's because that otter was so used to working with that. Here we go. That otter was so used to working with that staff member and having them touch their body and get used to that, that it was okay. It was not a traumatizing event. If we look back at Parker, let's go ahead and look at Parker here real quick. Parker, like I said, Parker's big. At Parker's peak, Parker can reach over 800 pounds. Now, if I were to ask Parker to step up on a scale, or I guess I should say, if I were to pick Parker up and put him on a scale and find out that he's over 800 pounds, it's not really possible, right? I'm pretty small. I'm not going to be able to push Parker around and get him onto a scale. But instead, I can communicate with Parker and we work together, and I can ask Parker to move from point A to point B, from point B to point C. And then that becomes a normal behavior between Parker and I. And then we can ask Parker to move up on top of the scale. And now Parker is an active participant. Our sea lions also get eye drops. And they're used to putting their head up. They're used to having their eyes open. They're used to our staff touching their face. That way they're able, again, it's not traumatizing. It's a type of desensitization. It becomes normal so that it's not weird for them, right? Have you ever tried something new? Hopefully, right? Now, when you try something new, it can be really scary at first, right? You're not really sure what to expect. But if you continue to do that thing over and over and over again, sometimes it gets a lot easier. For example, the first time I taught right here in this studio, oh man, I was a nervous wreck. And yet here I am 3 or 4 months later, and it seems like, I feel a lot more comfortable stepping in here. So it just becomes getting used to a scenario. So our animals have been able to get used to that care, and our staff, and it allows them to be much more comfortable. Natalie wants to know, do all the animals, including the fish, get a checkup in that room? Great question, Natalie. And that's actually going to lead us into a little bit of the emergency care that we have dealt with. So Parker's really big. Parker typically gets his checkup in his exhibit. That's because we have those portable machines that allow us to go to the exhibit and care for Parker up there. A lot of our smaller animals, like I said, our reptiles just recently were in there. They will get transported like it's like a pet carrier that you might put your cat in to go to the vet, right? So our smaller, more portable ones definitely go into the Molina Animal Care Center. Our fish, on the other hand, their care is mostly observational. So another role that our divers do, right? I mentioned the cleaning that they do. Another role that the divers, another role that the aquarists deal with, even education staff members as we pass through our galleries, we'll keep an eye on our animals. Okay, so they might not necessarily get pulled out and go to the care center, but we know what's normal behavior for them. We know what's normal coloration for them. We know what's normal for them, right, in any aspect. And when we see something that's abnormal, we're able to alert our vet staff, and they can take care of that fish. Now, with that being said, I talked a lot about different kinds of animals just now. We've talked about mammals, we've talked about birds, we've talked about fish. So I want you to think about the challenges that might come with being a care specialist at a large institution like this, dealing with all these different kinds of animals. It's always impressive to me when I go down and ask, well, what are you working on? And they're like, oh, this is a Moray eel. This is the issue. And I'm like, well, how did you learn this, right? Because yesterday you were working on a bird, and the day before that you were working on something else, right? So there's always something new for me to learn and discover, and also for our vet staff to work on. One of those was actually a fish, right? And so to us, it might seem weird to take a fish out of an exhibit and walk it down to the care center, but in emergency situations, that's exactly what has to happen. So we had a Moray eel, and it had a laceration. It was cut open right here, and we had to do an emergency surgery, right? And that happens. And so they were able to take the eel from its exhibit, and that eel was transported in a really big tub of water, and it's rolled down to the care center. Then you do surgery on it. But what does that even look like, right? So this is an example of one of our eels. This is a California moray. This is a different scenario, but you can see that it's in that big black tub that I was talking about. And right here, our vet is putting in anesthesia medicine, right? So that's what puts us to sleep during surgeries. Well, we also put eels to sleep during surgeries. And on that, I'm going to share one of my favorite challenges that I learned about eels here at the aquarium. I learned that moray eels in particular are really hard to put under anesthesia. If you put too much, then that eel's not waking up. But if you put too little, that eel will wake up mid-surgery. Can you imagine? Right? So I actually saw that happen during a surgery. And so, like I said, during our emergency procedures, we'll get an educator out front to talk through what's happening to our guests. We try to interpret between the vet staff and our audience and our guests who are watching. But once we get the eel out of here, right? So they're medicated. We put them on a special table that we have. I'm not sure we have a great picture of it. But, oh, here we go. Perfect. If we can pause. Okay, so this bar is in the way, but you get the idea because it's just blocking the eel. It might disappear. But if not, that's okay. So what it is it's sitting on top of this tray. Right? Oh, there we go. And so we have it kind of barricaded in this little like trough to hold the animal in place. And we'll do that with all of our fish. And then in the mouth, our vet technician, this is Julie, I believe, our vet technician has a tube going into the mouth of that eel. And that's because eels get their oxygen from water that runs into their mouth and passes over their gills. And so you can see this tube here comes up and around. It's coming from below the tray right here, and it's in a bin that's labeled anesthesia bin. And what's happening is this tube is continuously pumping water into the fish's mouth with medicine that's keeping it asleep, and it's also providing oxygen. So it's like if we were to have like something to breathe with, right? We don't have gills, we have lungs, so we're usually breathing in with something over our mouth or nose. They get the tube into their mouth, running over their gills. Then you perform the surgery. And you have to wait. Normally, you'll see this is a wet towel right here. We'll keep that animal nice and wet throughout the procedure. One of the person's roles is to actually make sure to take the water and soak that animal periodically. And then you make the incision, you do your surgery, you stitch that animal back up, and then have something called the wake-up water, which is exactly what it sounds like. Right? It wakes up the animal. And all it is just regular seawater. It just doesn't have the medicine in it anymore. And so this is what an eel surgery might look like. Do you want to press play? See what we've got? There we go. So the light's kind of shining right there. We're not going to see details, but you can see that this, sure enough, is an eel undergoing surgery. And there it is. So this eel had a mass that was growing in its head, and we were able to remove that. So again, incredibly spectacular. That was an emergency procedure. That one might not have been, but the moray eel that I was starting to talk about in the beginning was an emergency procedure. We were able to clean out the laceration, stitch her up, and then she actually was in a holding tank, which is a behind-the-scenes tank that our animals go into to monitor their behavior and their health. And then once she was all healthy, she was put back on exhibit. So amazing things go on in the Molina Animal Care Center. I hope you were able to learn a little bit about what it means to take care of an animal here and some of the challenges we might face. Remember, a lot of our animal health care is preventative, making sure that nothing does go wrong, making sure that they have the proper habitat, the place to they have the proper food, the right nutrition, making sure that their water and their exhibit is nice and clean, and then of course, having our vet care do an annual checkup on a lot of our animals. And then we ended by talking about maybe some of those emergency procedures, something that might go wrong in an exhibit. The same reason that we might have to go to urgent care or the ER or anything like that. So again, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about our animal health care. This is a subject that we could talk about for hours and hours because we find it so interesting and we have a lot of case studies we could cover. If you want to discover a little bit more about that, we do have a career connections option on our website that will actually introduce you to our vet staff and talk a little bit more about what their job might be like. We do also have career connections to be an aquarist, I think even to be a mammologist, maybe not, but definitely an aquarist. So I highly encourage you to check that out. Don't forget, our text line is going to be off here, but feel free to email us questions at live@lbaop.org. And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon, and thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye-bye.